Welcome to the ExecMBA podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. So on this episode of the podcast, we welcome back an old friend, my admissions colleague, Katherine Alford. Katherine has been on the podcast before, and she joined us recently to share her tips and advice for Executive MBA applicants as we get ready for our upcoming deadlines, January 10, February 10, March 10, so on and so forth. We'll be here before you know it. So if you're planning to apply to the Executive MBA program in the coming weeks in the new year, this episode is essential listening. So without further ado, here's my interview with my admissions colleague, Katherine Alford. Katherine, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Brett. Thanks for having me.
I should say welcome back to the podcast. You might be our most frequent guest on the ExecMBA podcast.
What an achievement.
I know. How does it feel to be part of history?
Feels pretty special. I thought there was something different in the air when I woke up this morning.
That's what we're talking about. That is why you are perhaps, we'll have to ask the historians for the podcast, but it's why you are perhaps our number one guest of all time, at least in terms of appearances. Thank you for coming back. I want to check in with you. We're after the Thanksgiving holiday. You know, we've got the winter break coming up. How are you doing? How's everything?
I'm doing well, Brett. I'm spending the month in Lexington, Kentucky, where I grew up, and I'm enjoying the holiday season, even though it looks very different than ever before. You know, my grandmother always said, no holiday is ever the same. Wise words.
Nostradamus, perhaps here for 2020. Unusual times, as has been noted, but glad you're doing well and able to spend some time with your family. Thank you, as always, for taking time out for the podcast. Given that we're recording this in December, we've got a number of deadlines upcoming, January 10, February 10, March 10. The list goes on. We offer monthly deadlines, all focused on one enrollment date, August 2021. But we figured, we got the winter break. This could be a good time to help people start getting organized if they're thinking about applying with one of our 2021 deadlines. So with that in mind, maybe we'll tackle a few frequent questions before we get into some tips about how people might most effectively use their break. So, Katherine, one of the ones that people always ask is, what is the admissions committee looking for in an applicant or when reviewing an application? Where do you start with this question?
Yeah, that's a great question because there are a number of things that we are looking for. I think the first thing I think of when I think about the application is looking for academic aptitude. We want to make sure that everyone we admit will do well in the classroom. So to get a feel for academic readiness, we will look at undergraduate transcripts, graduate transcripts, non-degree related coursework, professional certifications such as a CFA or CPA, and of course, standardized tests. We'll also be looking at the student's professional experience. As you know better than anyone, Brett, Darden teaches through the case method of instruction. So faculty rely on students sharing their ideas and perspectives that they have formed through their own professional journeys. So we're going to look at the professional experiences each of our applicants can bring and think about how they'll add value to the classroom experience and discussion. We'll be looking for leadership traits too. After all, we are a leadership school. And we can identify leaders through their professional experiences to date, through the extracurricular activities they've been a part of, and even family and life circumstances. We're looking for fits within our community and thinking about how students may get involved not only in the classroom, but also outside of the classroom through student clubs and activities. Darden's Executive MBA program is rigorous, and we want to admit people who are excited about the opportunity to be pushed out of their comfort zone, who are ready to dive into the material, and who are also motivated to support and encourage their classmates who are going through the same experience.
So a lot of things. It's very much a holistic review. I think one of the things we always stress with candidates is the best thing about the application process is that, we're going to read your entire application, so everything matters. One of the biggest challenges in the application process is that everything matters, and we're going to read your full application. So you really have to think about the story you're telling, the narrative you're advancing through your materials, what you're highlighting for our admissions committee. I always encourage applicants to think about the application itself as an initial introduction to who you are. It's not going to be possible to highlight everything about your story. There are other questions that we'll ask about in the interview that we don't even touch upon in the application. For example, the classic one is why Darden? But if you think about the sort of flow of our review process, there's the application, then an initial interview invitation review, and then an opportunity, if you're extended an interview invitation, to share more about your story, more depth, more detail about who you are, who you'll be in the classroom. And so think about how these two parts of the application can really supplement each other as you're, again, telling your story about who you are and who you'll be in our Executive MBA community. I'm glad that you mentioned clubs and organizations, because I think that's one of the storylines that's maybe a bit different than what prospective students oftentimes expect for an Executive MBA program. We have 6 formal organizations, and we have a number of emerging interest groups, healthcare, social impact, the list goes on. Katherine, when you talk about the community of people at Darden in the Executive MBA program, what do you typically highlight?
I highlight how close-knit it is. I think sometimes there can be a misperception that the students don't get to know each other as well, given that they're living busy lives, working full-time, and just kind of going to school once a week, one weekend a month, and on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. I don't think they realize how much they are going to be interacting with their classmates on a daily basis. One of our current students told me the other day that she talks to at least 2 classmates every single day. The reality is you're going through an intense experience. You're reading a lot of cases. You're applying the things that you're learning immediately at your job and your organization. It's a really exciting season of life. You want to share the things that you're learning with other people. You want to talk about the things you're learning with your classmates, and you want to also get their perspectives and ask them for support when life is crazy, job is crazy, and you're trying to figure out how to manage a particular situation. So a lot of different factors bring our students together in a really tight-knit way.
No, that's a great point. I do think the students who choose Darden are choosing it because it has that sort of all-in culture, right? The case method is going to ask you to show up for class in a different way than maybe a lecture-based approach would, because you have to be ready to contribute, share your perspective, learn from your classmates. And the group of people who self-select into that academic experience are also a group of people who really want to get to know their classmates and be engaged outside of the classroom. That's one of the things that I always talk about, is just a group of people who decide that they want to be part of an active participation based MBA experience. It's true on full-time. It's also true for our Executive MBA students as well. So we talked about this sort of holistic process where we're looking at all these things. So we're trying to get a gauge for who you are and who you'll be in the classroom, outside of the classroom. When you think about what makes for a strong application, right? So an application that stands out from maybe other applications we are receiving, what do you typically highlight for students when they ask this question?
That is a question we get a lot. And there's actually a lot of diversity in the Executive MBA student body. No 2 candidates are exactly the same. So, we have students in the program who have 5 years of professional work experience. We have students with 25 years of professional work experience, and we have everything in between. We have students who come from the public sector. We have students who come from the private sector, students who are looking to be promoted and advance in their current organization, students who are looking to pivot to a different industry or function, students who are looking to be an entrepreneur. And there's no one particular profile that we prefer or like to see. So I think what really differentiates a strong candidate and helps an application shine, in my opinion, is its self-awareness. So when candidates are able to thoughtfully explain their professional experiences to date, the decisions they've made, the motivation behind their decisions, and are then able to provide a strong rationale for why they're pursuing an MBA at this time, why they are interested in Darden's program as opposed to another program, and then what they hope to accomplish with an MBA. Those students who do that well really pop to me as a reader and an admissions committee member. And that seems pretty simple, but it's actually much harder than it sounds. It takes a lot of thought and self-reflection to kind of solidify your story and figure out what it is that you want to communicate and share with the admissions committee.
That's absolutely true. I think we oftentimes hear from applicants on the other side, as they're preparing to matriculate, about all the introspection and reflection they did and how much they appreciated the opportunity to think about these kinds of questions. And we really do hope that applicants take full advantage of the opportunity that the application process presents to think about the why of your story. I loved your answer because it really emphasized the importance of why. And it's not just what you've done, but why have you taken these steps and why do you want to get an MBA? Why do you want to come to Darden? That's certainly a question we'll spend some time with in the interview. What are your career goals and why are those your goals? The more self-reflection and introspection you can do, the more I think depth there is to the application, the more richness there is to the application. And I think the reason why we always highlight story is oftentimes candidates will think that they are very similar to other people who share their background, right? I am a consultant, or I'm from this particular area or this particular background. And the reality is the more you focus on what makes you different and unique in your story and your values and how you see the world, your perspective, the more you become different from the other people in the pool. And we're so interested in that difference because of the case method and how students learn. Is that something that you typically highlight for students?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that people worry that they may be too similar to somebody else who maybe work for the same company. And so I always start with, well, where did you grow up? Where did you go to high school? Where did you go to college? What did you do immediately after school? What role did you have in that company? And as they start answering those questions, I think people start realizing that their story is pretty unique. It's not that hard to be different. It's a lot easier to be different than the same. And so it's definitely something that we talk a lot about in the application process. And I think it's actually a really fun and exciting part of applying to school is really trying to think through how your story differentiates you from everyone else and what makes you a special and unique person.
Absolutely. And if you talk to our current students, you will hear that they feel like they're part of a curated cohort, right? So there are people from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different experiences, life experience, work experience in the room. And we always come back to that classroom environment when thinking about putting the class together. We're thinking about the fact that you'll be learning together from each other. You'll be in a discussion-based setting where you are sharing your thoughts about a case and pulling on your past experiences in those conversations. And we really want as much difference as possible in that classroom. I think we know that that makes for a richer, more vibrant discussion. We started this conversation about just thinking about all the things that go into our decision-making process or application review process as an admissions committee. It's very holistic, lots of things on our mind because there's so many things that make a student successful at Darden. Katherine, what are some of the things that you highlight for prospective students if they ask you, gosh, what makes a student successful or what stands out, for people who really, distinguish themselves at Darden?
Yeah, so I'm looking for students who are really excited to put their all into this experience. It goes by really quickly. And so students who are excited to read the pieces, meet with their learning team, get involved in extracurriculars, get to know their classmates and their professors, the more you put into the program, the more you'll get out of the program.
I agree with that. So does our fearless leader, the Senior Associate Dean for Professional Degree Programs, Yael Grushka-Cocaine. She wrote a blog post not so long ago, a Q&A for the Discover Darden blog, where she said Darden has this incredible reflective quality where the more you put in, the more you get out. And I think we who have been around students, you've been here much longer than I have, but being around our students, you realize that there's a tremendous amount of potential in the Darden experience, in the classroom, outside the classroom. And it's that passion and curiosity that students bring to all of these interactions that really, really can make the difference for people in terms of their experience. So many things matter as you approach this. Many people will sometimes worry, oh gosh, I don't have the right background academically for this or professionally. I appreciate your earlier point about many different kinds of people can be successful. It's not about having one right background. It's not about being from a particular work setting. We are really trying to get a sense of who you are and really trying to build a class with as much difference as possible, thinking about those classroom conversations and the experience outside the classroom. So we started by saying, hey, look, this is a great time to get organized. We've got a holiday or winter break coming up, and we want to help you do that. We're approaching the midpoint of our admission cycle. Figured this would be a good opportunity to share some tips and advice that we have. So Katherine, the preparation for this was 3 tips you would have for people as they approach this holiday break, this winter break, and they're getting organized. Are you ready?
Yeah. So I would say my first tip is to take some time to really read through the application and think about what we've been talking about on this podcast today, the story that you're telling. Think about how to use each piece of the application to share a different part of that story. So that takes a little bit of time. So give yourself some time to read through and think thoughtfully about the story you're telling. And keep in mind, none of these questions or parts of the application are meant to be difficult or challenging, and there are no trick questions. We're just really trying to get to know who you are, and so the questions we ask are directed in that spirit. So take some time to think about it. That's my first piece of advice. My second piece of advice is to connect with students in the programs where you're applying. That can be really helpful. Not only will they be able to shed more light on the program that you're looking at, but they can also, as you hear them share a little bit about their own background, their own MBA journey, it can help you think through your own story and how you want to structure the story you're telling. And then my last piece, my third piece of advice is that, as always, if you feel like your academic or quantitative profile can use a little bit of a boost, you can always spend some time preparing for and taking a standardized test.
All right, so let's unpack that. I have a few tips of my own. We'll get into those too. But first and foremost, I'm glad you highlighted again the storytelling aspect of this. Each part of the application is an opportunity to share a different part of yourself. I always encourage candidates to think about those parts of the application where you can demonstrate a bit more personality, where we can get a sense of your voice. The most natural places to do that would be things like the short answer questions. Resume is also an opportunity. I don't know how you feel. I'm curious your thoughts on this. When people share books that they're reading, podcasts, hobbies, interests, it's a little different than a professional resume, but the nice thing is you will have given us the nuts and bolts of your employment history in the application itself. So chance to maybe be a little outside the box, maybe on the resume, at least in terms of highlighting some personal interest. What do you think about that approach?
Oh, I love seeing multiple dimensions of an individual. We aren't all just our professional background, all just our academic background. We're bringing a lot of different things to the community, to the classroom, to the student social events, etc. So showing a lot of different dimensions of who you are and what you'll add is a great thing to do.
Absolutely. Your advice about connecting with students, I think, or alumni, I think that we always think it's the people who really define this program. And we benefit as an admissions team from having students and alumni who are really eager to share their background and their experience and talk about their MBA decision. In fact, we were just online last night with a number of current students and alums having this conversation. And I never get over the fact that we send out emails to folks saying, hey, would you mind taking an hour out of your Wednesday to come speak with prospective students? And people are so eager to do it. When you talk about the Darden Alumni Network, I know you know so many people who come to Darden through the years. What do you highlight about this particular group of people?
Well, I'm laughing to myself right now because I'm thinking about the comment you made last night about how you continue scheduling webinars and podcasts so that you can spend time with the people that you like being around. And I think that says so much about the Darden community, that the people just like being around each other. There is no one who feels like they go through this process and this experience alone. It is a group and a team effort. You will be surrounded by your faculty, the staff, your classmates, etc. Everybody is rooting for you and your success. And your success looks different from the next person's success. And so people will be making an effort and taking time to understand what success looks like for you and how they can be a part of your journey to get there.
Absolutely. And, again, can't say it enough. The people who come to Darden are interested in getting to know their classmates. This is not a transactional experience. I think we say this time and time again, but to me, it bears repeating because we want the people who ultimately matriculate and enroll come August to really be there with that sort of enthusiasm and passion about, hey, I want to meet everybody in this room, and I want to get to know the 135 plus people in my class, because that's the real richness of the experience. It's fascinating to hear faculty talk about the case method. And these are people who research, publish, they're subject matter experts in their field, but they will oftentimes say, you may learn as much in this particular discussion from your classmates, if not more, than me, just because of the way that the case method works, and the fact that we have Executive MBA students whose experiences may directly intersect with the particular topic. Is that something that you talk about with prospective students, the sort of the impact of the case method, particularly for that lateral learning, that peer-to-peer sharing?
Yes, and it's interesting because I think one of the biggest differences for me between being an undergraduate student and a graduate student is that your faculty really do become more like your peers, and you will not meet a faculty member at Darden who doesn't talk about how much they learn from their students. And so it's really important to think about what the perspective and experiences that you'll bring to the discussion. The faculty will be excited to learn from you just as much as you will be learning from them.
Well, the interesting thing about Darden faculty, particularly from a research standpoint, is that they want to be close to industry. That is their orientation. So they do a lot of consulting. They obviously do a lot of case writing. And they're very interested in being connected with practitioners. This is not theoretical. Darden has always had this orientation. But we talked with Yael on her Ask Me Anything session, where she's talking about all of the consulting and all the case writing that she's doing. And she came to Darden and has remained at Darden because of this focus on industry and being connected to industry and what actual practitioners are doing in the field. So you talked about standardized tests, and we have a really helpful blog post out there as students make their test choice or consider their options. There's two paths for folks. You can choose to submit a test waiver request with your application. You can choose to take a standardized test. The test waiver request, that particular path is really, do you feel like you can make a strong case for a test waiver? And as we think about reviewing those waiver requests, we're really thinking about all the things in your application that may give us some sense of your academic readiness and preparation. All the things that Katherine mentioned earlier: undergraduate, graduate coursework, non-degree related coursework, professional certifications, what you do day in, day out. So if you feel like you can make a strong case, you're certainly welcome and encouraged to submit a test waiver request. But there are always Executive MBA candidates that when they step back from their application, think about it holistically, think about it objectively, they say at the end of the balance of that, I think I would actually really benefit from having a more recent data point regarding my academic preparation. And that's where a standardized test can come in. Katherine, we are fans of the executive assessment, although we accept the EA, GMAT, GRE, MCAT, LSAT. You have any tips that you share with candidates as they think about sort of approaching a standardized test? I know that this can be a bit nerve-wracking. Any standardized tests, for people through their past educational experience, can be a little nerve-wracking. What do you highlight for candidates?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, Brett and I are big fans of the executive assessment. The executive assessment is a shorter exam than the GMAT or GRE, and it usually takes about 20-ish hours to prepare for the executive assessment, which is essentially the amount of time that we suggest spending on the Executive MBA program once you are currently enrolled as a student. So I think studying for the executive assessment can be a bit of a litmus test to think about your readiness to participate in a program like Darden's Executive MBA program. And through it kind of, you get back into the study mode and the student zone and see how that feels and see how that fits. And when you sit for the test, it's only a 90-minute exam, and do well on it, it gives you a little bit more confidence and excitement about participating in the program. And it also gives the admissions committee another data point that they can use in admissions, but also for merit-based scholarship decisions.
And that's absolutely true. So much good content there. So we view all these tests equivalently, but the EA is our most popular test with Executive MBA applicants. 40-question, 90-minute test, as Katherine referenced, we're finding that people are studying a little bit more for it. So when the test first launched, maybe about 10 to 15 hours of preparation time on average for candidates. There's more to study now just because there's more practice questions and more materials are made available through the executive assessment website. And so if you do all the materials that GMAC makes available as part of that EA prep package, it's about 30 hours of studying, but still not what you would expect with something like, say, the GMAT or GRE, which can be for some test takers around the world, maybe 100 plus hours of preparation. The other thing that I really like about the executive assessment is that at least in its conception, it was designed with executive MBA applicants and executive MBA programs in mind, and in consultation with executive MBA programs. We were the 7th school globally to accept the executive assessment. We have been accepting it now this will be our 4th admission cycle, and really do think it's a good test. If you don't know about it, take some time to learn about it. It's a test of readiness. It consists of integrated reasoning, verbal reasoning, and quantitative reasoning. So a little bit different than GMAT. And again, GMAT or GRE. And the other thing, again, can't stress this enough, it's a test of readiness. So you're not going to get you're not going to get a percentile breakdown. You're going to get an overall score. You're going to get scores breakdowns by section. And we as a school are happy to help you contextualize your score within the broader context of our executive MBA applicant pool. We have candidates who have scores ranging from the 140s to the 160s. Our average score has been 153 for the past 3 years, but it's worth repeating that we do not have a minimum or qualifying score. We're going to take that test score and try to understand it, what it means within the broader context of your application. So that's a lot about the executive assessment, but I will say I'm fresh off a podcast on the Inside the GMAT podcast talking about the executive assessment and how it works within the application process for candidates. So if you don't know much about the test, recommend that podcast episode to you as well. All right, Katherine, I have a few tips of my own, but I'm interested in your thoughts about this. So one thing that I always encourage candidates to do, just as they orient to our application process, is to spend a little time with our deadlines page, because we will oftentimes get questions from candidates about why so many deadlines. How do these work? And if you look at the deadlines page, which as you listen to this podcast, you may be pulling it up, you'll notice that we have monthly deadlines. So we referenced some of the upcoming deadlines earlier in this podcast: January 10, February 10, March 10. So we have monthly deadlines, all focused on one enrollment date, August 2021. And we have these monthly deadlines really to give you options and flexibility. We know how busy our executive MBA candidates are, and we know that life happens sometimes when people are working on executive MBA applications. And so find that kind of flexibility of, say you're targeting January and things get really busy and you need to push back to February, that another deadline is just around the corner. We find that flexibility is helpful to people, gives them some peace of mind. But each deadline has sort of functions as a discrete round, has its own target interview period, decision release date, and deposit deadline. Katherine, any advice that you give candidates when it comes to timing of application?
Yeah, so we always talked about how it's a good idea to apply earlier in the process. Every seat's available, every scholarship dollar is available. But at the end of the day, you really want to be applying when you feel like you're going to be the strongest candidate. We still have room in the class, even though we have had a few rounds go by. We usually don't fill up until later in the spring anyways. So as long as you're applying before late spring, you're usually in good shape. It's nice to have it out of the way and apply earlier, but you shouldn't do that at the expense of submitting a weaker application.
Absolutely. I think the piece of advice that I always think that you share is apply as early as you feel like you can put together a strong application. And I think that's a good way to think about it. If you're listening to this podcast in December and it's getting organized, it's a great time to think about planning, because we're still, like I said, we're approaching the midpoint of our cycle. We'll go until the class fills, which as Katherine notes, is typically can be May, June, July timeframe, depends upon the year. Every cycle has its own rhythm. But this is a good time to apply. Our January, February, March rounds are always some of our most popular ones. All right, so my next recommendation is actually all about recommendations. So start talking with your recommender. We have one required recommendation as part of our executive MBA application process. We will accept up to 3 recommendations, so you can have a second or third recommender. as part of your application materials. If you choose to go the sort of route of having additional recommenders beyond the one required recommendation, make sure that each additional person is sharing something new about you or bringing a new perspective that's not provided in that one recommendation. But you do have that flexibility. But as you think about this part of your application, we recommend that you talk to these people first. Talk to them not just about, hey, I'm applying, will you be a recommender for me? But why are you applying? Why are you interested in pursuing an MBA? Why are you interested in Darden? Share a copy of your resume with them. These are all really good ways to sort of begin the conversation. Make sure that they know about the work that you've done together, the projects, the accomplishments. Your recommenders should write the materials themselves, focus, on filling out the ratings grid and answering the questions themselves. But you can really put your recommender in position to be successful with a really good recommendation by some advanced planning, having some of these conversations up front. Katherine, how should people think about who would be a good recommender? It's always one of the popular questions.
Yeah, so we use a common recommendation letter that is created by GMAC. So I always say start by Googling common recommendation letter, GMAC, just to look through the questions that are going to be asked of the recommender. The questions are things like, in what context do you know this person? How does this person's performance compare to others in a similar role? And to explain a piece of constructive feedback the person has given you and how that the applicant responded to that piece of feedback. And so read through the recommendation letter and think about who would be able to write the best recommendation letters. It's surprising to some people that we're not as interested in seeing recommendation letters from faculty members. Usually your teachers from undergrad are able to talk about the grade that you made in their class, which is what we can already see on the transcript. We're really trying to get a better feel for what it's like to work with you. So typically stronger recommendation letters come from some who work with you in a professional environment. And there is no rule about who has to write your recommendation letter. While we advise direct supervisors, there are many situations when that's not the best choice. So it's a judgment call. So you need to use your best judgment reading through those questions about who would write the strongest letter for you.
You're right. It is at the applicant's discretion. You know who knows you best. We provide generalized advice, but there's always exceptions. We recognize, even as we were on these webinars sharing application tips about picking a recommender, it's ultimately the applicant's decision. I will note that we do have a helpful recommendations post on the Discover Darden blog. This is kind of bleeding into my third tip. But we try to be as transparent as possible through the application process. We do podcasts like this, we do webinars, they're application focused, really because we want you to have every opportunity to put together the strongest application possible. We want to help you. We want you to understand how we think about reading applications. Your application will be read by multiple people. We make these decisions in committee. And so we want to make sure we're putting you in a position to be successful. So be sure to check out our blog. And so that is called Discover Darden. And we have a really helpful ExecMBA application tips section where you will find tips about recommendations, standardized tests, and so much more. So my third tip, and you've already found your way to the ExecMBA podcast if you're listening to this, which is great. That's one of our resources. The blog is another. And we have a bunch of upcoming events and webinars and ways for you to learn about the school. I think as a committee, we like to see that people have done their research and have been engaged with us. So certainly talk to current students and alumni, but take advantage of the events and programming that we're putting out there, the resources that we share. Obviously, we spend some time on our website too, so we've got pretty helpful application process and FAQs pages as you continue to orient to the application process and you learn about the structure and design of our program and how our financial aid process works and all these kinds of things. But put in some time, do your research, do your homework up front, because Katherine, in my experience, that typically makes for a stronger application too. The applicant has a better sense of why they want to do this, why they want to come to Darden. Ultimately, I think you can feel it as you read through the application materials if the person's done that due diligence. Is that your experience too?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a big investment. It's a big investment of time. It's a big investment of resources. And at the end of the day, you want to be 110% confident that this is the best decision for you and your career goals. And the more time you spend learning about the program and taking advantage of the resources that we put out there, the more comfortable you'll feel with the program, and the more excited you will be about making this sort of investment.
Absolutely. And we started, or at least I started my tips by saying, familiarize yourself with our deadlines. So things move very quickly in the Executive MBA application process. It's about 3 weeks from deadline to decision release, and then about 3 weeks from decision release to deposit deadline, meaning you're going to have a little bit less than a month to make your decision if you are admitted. And so we encourage you to do as much research as you can upfront. Obviously, if you receive an offer of admission, we're here to help you finalize your decision. Whatever information would be helpful to you. If there are people you want to talk to, we do admitted student programming as well. But do your research now. Not only because it will help make for a stronger application, but will also help you maybe make your decision a little bit quicker, given that you will have a limited amount of time to finalize your decision. So Katherine, I think we got it. Any other tips, any last piece of advice that you would want to share with our listeners out there?
I would say my last piece of advice is to enjoy the process. I don't think we frequently take time out to really reflect on our life to date and where we want to go. And so this is a fun journey to be on. And so enjoy it, share it with your friends, share it with your loved ones, and enjoy the ride.
I was struck last night being online with some of our students and alumni and prospective students that as you go through this process, even though we're in this more virtual environment, we're still trying to find ways for people to connect, right? So that was a virtual networking event. We've got an admitted student meetup tonight with some of our admitted students. We want to give people a chance to build connections, to meet people, to learn, and to really get excited about joining the Darden community. And so there is a lot of fun you can have in as an applicant, as a prospective student, as you continue to learn about and explore Darden. I think we feel like, the culture, the fact that you are joining a community, that this is a big differentiator for Darden generally, this sort of feel that people have, spending time with classmates and current students and alumni, and take full advantage of that. I think that's something that may get maybe a bit underplayed when people are choosing working professional programs. They tend to focus on schedule, time, and convenience. But the reality is our program is 21 months, and you're joining a network for life. And you really want to feel like you're going to be around a group of people who are going to support you in a place where you can thrive. And you're joining a community that you're really excited to be a part of. So Katherine, thank you for your time. As always, it's always great having you on the podcast. And I hope you stay safe out there visiting your family in Kentucky. And thank you as always for all your great insights for our applicants.
You're welcome, Brett. Until next time.
And that was my interview with my admissions colleague, Katherine Alford. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at exec, that's EXEC, MBA at darden.virginia.edu. Until next time, stay safe, be well, and happy holidays.